2023 is the year the mainstream comic book media, if you even want to call them that anymore, it's not like anybody's reading anything that they say, finally caught up to the truth of what's happening in the comic book industry itself. Things are not going well. Sales are down, and there are a lot of people basically bored, tired, fed up, and walking away from mainstream American comic books. And when I say that, I'm talking about Marvel and DC comics, or what used to be mainstream comic books. Mainstream comic books in America really is manga and Scholastic right now, notably like Dogman. And it's not so much Batman and Superman, Spider-Man, the X-Men, Wolverine. For some reason, these characters and these wonderful universes have taken a back seat to Dogman. And I think it's a pathetic place to be for the entire industry. And it's nice to see that people who have been claiming things have never been better, American comic books, retailers are doing stronger than ever, are finally having to admit the truth because it's gotten so bad they can no longer deny what's happening. Point in case, there's recently an article from the Comics Beat from Heidi McDonald talking about the malaise at Marvel Comics and how things got so bad and why the current state of Marvel Comics just absolutely sucks and no one really cares. Think to yourselves, what's the good series Marvel Comics are putting out right now? I would say in continuity, probably it's Moon Knight. It's not even the best Moon Knight series of all time. It certainly wouldn't have been a top 10 Marvel comic book 13 years ago, but today it stands out as not only being the best, but being the best by a mile. There's one other series in continuity that feels pretty good, that has a chance to be really good. The Hulk series from Phil Kennedy Johnson. Everything else in continuity pretty much blows. The entire X-Men line sucks. Spider-Man sucks. Captain America sucks. Iron Man sucks. The Avengers, not quite as bad as it was before, but I'm still not ready to jump on board the Avengers and Jed McKay because I still remember Taskmaster. And I still remember liking the beginning of Jason Aaron's Avengers run, and seeing how badly it went so quickly makes me just a little bit hesitant to believe that the people at Marvel Comics have finally gotten something right and can actually tell a good comic book series. It's a somewhat interesting article. She doesn't actually provide many, answers as to what Marvel Comics can do, except for at the very end, she gives one answer, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. We'll kind of get to that. She also talks about this article recently from sketch.com, which I guess is behind a paywall, at least most of it is. But she does mention a couple of things, and I'll talk about one of the quotes from there that really spotlights 100, 1,000, 1,000,000% why Marvel Comics absolutely suck in 2023. And we'll talk about some of the ways I think Marvel Comics can be fixed and why it won't happen. The article begins, "It doesn't help that the industry itself is in a slump at the moment. Sales have slowed or, at best, plateaued from their pandemic-era highs. And while no comic publisher Funko'd it up, expanding wildly and disastrously based on temporary sales patterns, no one, aside from some crowdfunders, is really whooping it up either. It's not a knock on the material. We've had so many great comics for so long that we take it for granted how much good stuff is out there." And that's the first fault really in this article. It's not the publisher's fault. It's not the comic books themselves. It's something else. It's just a general malaise. No, it is the material. The comic books right now, especially from Marvel Comics, basically suck across the board, except for a select few series in continuity, the two that I mentioned, and maybe Ghost Rider. I still think Ghost Rider is pretty okay. And then a bunch of stuff being written in continuity 30 years ago from writers that actually know what they're doing. Your Peter Davids, your J.M. DeMatteis, writers like that. Otherwise, there's nothing going on right now at Marvel Comics. And it's not because we shouldn't be knocking the material. It's because the material sucks. They're not telling original stories with the characters anymore. They're basically just regurgitating the same stories over and over and over again. And it's not like they're even regurgitating the same Iron Man story. They're taking stories from other characters and just putting a new coat of paint on it and saying it's an Iron Man story. And people aren't liking it because it's not interesting. It's not refreshing. And for the most part, almost across the board, they're not even really superhero stories anymore. It almost feels like the writers and the editors at Marvel Comics right now identify better with the villains than with the heroes themselves. So we're always seeing the heroes brought down a peg, be made to look stupid, not doing heroic things. And that's a DC problem as well. And a lot of the creators, they're trying to create their own new characters in these universes. And in order to prop them up as being important and powerful, they're basically taking your big time mainstream heroes that actually have popularity, your Wolverines, your Spider-Man, your X-Men characters, and they're making them look like chumps in comparison to their own creator-owned self-insert fanfic characters that they're creating for the universe itself. And it's not working because none of these characters ever catch on. If you need an example of that, go check out Somnus in the X-Men line from Steve Orlando. Tell me that's not one of the worst characters in the history of comic books. The material, the comic books themselves, the stories, the writing absolutely sucks. And at Marvel, the art almost sucks across the board as well. There are a couple of key standout good comic book artists, but for the most part, Marvel Comics look like shit. She continues, but there's no denying that the periodical business, which drives so much of the comic shop traffic, seems particularly tapped out at the moment, with price increases and a bombardment of variant covers and miniseries being loaded into mason jars turned into mush. Which brings us to the state of Marvel. I don't read Marvel Comics regularly, so take this as an outsider's perspective. But even as an observer, the state of the big two is still key to many readers and retailers and tends to drive a lot of the narrative. DC is bravely hanging in there, despite corporate contempt, and doing what they can. But what's going on at the House of Ideas seems to have escaped much scrutiny. The answer is not much. And it's pretty crazy to think that someone that's been cheerleading the mainstream comic book industry for so long through the comics beat and basically been trying to put these rose-colored lenses over what's actually happening can say Marvel Comics isn't doing much because, well, they're certainly putting out a lot of comic books, right? There's at least 10 to 15 new comic books coming out each and every week from Marvel Comics. It's not like they don't have a lot of events. Hell, we're just getting into Fall of X, right? We've just gotten out of the Hellfire Gala. We're going to have a Spider-Man Gang War event. We've had a Daredevil event this year. Everybody's got an event. We had an X-Men, Avengers, Eternals crossover event all happen, but it feels like nothing happened. Because once you get to the end of all these events, nothing did happen. When you get to the end of Axe Judgment Day, from Kieran Gillen, who I think is one of the better writers, certainly he has a better pedigree than most of the writers at Marvel Comics right now. When you get to the end of his event, Axe Judgment Day, nothing happened. He basically undid everything in the final pages of the story, and basically, if you bought into the entire thing, you wasted all of your money. And that's really what it feels like when you're buying Marvel Comics these days. It feels like you're wasting all of your time and all of your money, and any love or compassion or passion for the industry that you had for the characters or the universe or any of that stuff is just being wasted on all these no talent having hacks that actually can't tell a good comic book story. The answers to fixing the comic book industry are actually pretty easy. And in fact, they have a lot of them in-house. They're putting a lot of their best writers. In fact, they're basically putting all the best writers, except for maybe like a Jed McKay, a Philip Kennedy Johnson. It's hard for me to say that Kieran Gillen's a good writer right now after everything that he's done on X-Men, but even a Kieran Gillen, you know, his Darth Vader series isn't that old. It wasn't Marvel Comics and was absolutely brilliant. They only have a handful of good writers on their in-continuity books, and all their best writers, their J.M. DeMatteis's, their Peter Davids, all those guys are writing in-continuity stories set 30 years ago. Why aren't all these super talented people writing their ongoing series? Yes, we are getting a return to Captain America with J. Michael Straczynski, and I hope everything works really well with that because he's actually a really good writer, and he certainly has a good handle on Cap, and Cap could use some tender loving care, but that's an absolute aberration in comparison to all the things that are going on with Marvel Comics these days. They have so many bad editors who basically are in charge of everything. As far as I can tell, in most cases, when a story is delivered from Marvel Comics, it was the idea of the editor or the assistant editor, and then they went out there and hired somebody to tell the story that they already came up with. Does anyone believe you can get the best creative stories out of writers, these creative people, when the stories are being dictated to them? When it's not with a character that they care about, when it's not concerning something they had any part of really in the creative process other than taking someone else's vision, putting it down on paper and writing it for them. They're basically hiring a bunch of parrots these days to just do what the editors want. And then somehow they're also casting the writers based on the surface traits, the sexuality, the gender identity, and all these other stupid non-factors about the character themselves on who should be the best writer for this character in this story or whatever. They aren't going out there trying to hire the best talent. And that there is the bottom line why Marvel Comics is failing these days. If you want an example, she actually quotes that article from sketch.com, and this is what they said in that article. The latter is connected to persistent creative losses at the publisher, as top names like Chip Zdarsky, Kelly Thompson, and Jason Aaron have seen their Marvel contributions wane, and up-and-comers like Tini Howard, Vita Ayala, and Matthew Rosenberg have disappeared altogether. There's been a quiet migration from Marvel to DC and other publishers, with few notable names replacing them. The impact of that brain drain is starting to be felt. Those are the words of sketch.com, not Heidi McDonald at the Comic Speech. She's actually quoting that article from sketch.com there. But think about what's said there. top names at Marvel Comics that were lost. Chip Zdarsky, pretty good writer. I don't think he'll ever be an A-lister or somebody that you would consider a really hot talent, but he's certainly dependable, reliable, and he can tell a good story when he's in the right frame of mind. It's too bad that he always wants to be the Tom Green of comic books. Kelly Thompson. Has Kelly Thompson ever had a best-selling series, period? Has Kelly Thompson ever written a comic book that stayed in the top 20 after 3 issues in her entire Marvel career? And she's written a hell of a lot of comics from Marvel at this point. Obviously, she's moved over to DC Comics now. There are a lot of behind-the-scenes reasons for that. Apparently, she wore out her welcome. Kelly Thompson is not a top name in the comic book industry. Kelly Thompson wouldn't be a top name for IDW, let alone Marvel Comics. Jason Aaron, yes, I'll give you that top name, Gore the God Butcher, but he certainly wore out his welcome just with the fans themselves, with everything that he did with Punisher, really being the last straw for everybody. But don't forget his Avengers run, which was absolutely atrocious. And then up-and-comers like Tini Howard, Vita Ayala, and Matthew Rosenberg. That's your big problem. The next wave of talent had no talent. Sure, Kelly Thompson is and never will be, but she could write an okay story here and there, even if she was extremely annoying just kind of as a person. Tini Howard has never written a good comic book series in her entire life. I don't believe she's ever actually written a good comic book issue in her entire life. Vita Ayala has written one good comic book story in the history of her entire writing credits. It's an 8-page story in Wonder Woman, I think, 80th anniversary special. She has an 8-page Silver Sable Wonder Woman story that's actually pretty good, which I'm pretty sure she's basically just, I don't know, doing the cliff notes from another story that was successful. That's the one thing in Vita Ayala's entire career that was ever worth reading. Matthew Rosenberg, his stuff on Uncanny X-Men, once they lost the other writers, was pretty good for about 7 issues. Other than that, he has absolutely sucked every step of the way. They should have left him at Black Mask, where they found him, and DC Comics never should have brought Matthew Rosenberg over to their publisher thinking that he was going to be their next James Tynion, which is basically what they've done. They've given him Joker, and he's basically ruined that character and Punchline and every other thing that he's touched. They never had another wave waiting to replace Jason Aaron and Chip Zdarsky and Kelly Thompson. There are no new good writers. They have Jed MacKay, Bill Kennedy Johnson, who certainly got his breaks over at DC. He was discovered during their new writers, writers workshop with Scott Snyder. I believe that was where he got his first big break. Jed MacKay obviously did get his break at Marvel Comics, but they've discovered one guy that isn't bad in the last 8 years. That is absolutely pitiful. And if you think about C.B. Cebulski, the editor-in-chief at Marvel Comics, before he became the EIC, his primary job was talent evaluation. He was literally spanning the globe, looking at everyone's portfolios, writing and art, and discovering the next great wave of talent from Marvel Comics. That's the guy that's in charge right now. And we can see he obviously never had an ounce of talent for discovering talent because they haven't done any of it. Their big hopes were Tini Howard, Vita Ayala, and Matthew Rosenberg. Enough fucking said. She ends the article stating this: Marvel needs to loosen up and try new things and create an environment where creators can create. Revort taking on X-Men isn't enough. Is there a way to allow more experimentation and new takes on Marvel's characters? Will we ever see another Alan Moore arrive to stand what we thought comics could do entirely on their head? Would Rachel Smythe taking on the Avengers fix everything? Even the failures of such experiments would probably be more exciting than what we're seeing now. Even the failures of such experiments would probably be more exciting than what we're seeing now. So that's her one big idea to fix Marvel Comics, is to put Rachel Smythe on the Avengers, the lady from Lore Olympus, the webtoon or whatever. Hugely successful. Not taking anything away from Rachel Smythe. Certainly lots of accolades, lots of awards, and certainly lots of sales. Every volume of Lore Olympus that's been released is outselling everything at Marvel. It's not even close. That is a talented person. But also in the same article, Heidi McDonald is lauding Jed MacKay, the current writer on Avengers, who's only been there for about 6 issues now. So you can't tell me Jed McKay is the next wave of talent. He's the big guy, and then say we should replace him with Rachel Smythe. But no, Rachel Smythe would not fix the current malaise that Marvel's comics is in. First of all, I don't know that she knows how to write superhero team-up books like that. And second of all, you still have to give, Jed McKay his time on that one. And then the other question, will we ever see someone like Alan Moore arrive in comic books and turn everything on its head? Not at Marvel Comics in 2023. Alan Moore is a talent that transcends comic books. And Alan Moore knew that. If he showed up to Marvel Comics in 2023 and he had some dipshit 24-year-old liberal arts degree having assistant editor telling him the story that he was going to be writing for Iron Man, he would never take the fucking job. And anybody with an ounce of talent, an ounce of self-respect wouldn't take that job either. And that's why we are where we are. Because the editorial staff at Marvel, which is very small and very untalented, is dictating and driving everything right now. It's not the creators. You can't have a situation where creators get to be creative when you have people like Jordan White and the Legion of Doofuses basically ruining everything at the very beginning of these runs. Nobody with talent is going to work for Marvel Comics in 2023 unless they get their own editorial direction, and I'm sure that's what Liefeld gets and some of these older creators. They probably take these old miniseries set in continuity 30 years ago just so they don't have to deal with Annalise Biss and some of these other really untalented editors at Marvel Comics. It's absolutely insane what's happened to Marvel Comics, and it's crazy that people are at least admitting there's a problem at Marvel, although in truthfulness, if you read the article, Heidi McDonald's not really sure. It's not the content. It's not the comics themselves. It's something else that's not working out right now. If you would like an example of just how bad things are at Marvel Comics now and how casting writers based on their gender identity and sexuality and their racial identity and stuff like that has completely gone awry, you need to see this review of Charlie Jane Anders' take on New Mutants. Charlie Jane Anders, it took him 4 years to bring this person onto the book, and it's one of the worst comics released in the last 20 years. There's also a link in the video description.